Is it possible to create 3D objects and game assets like this using just AI? Well, almost, but you can get pretty close if you know some basic blendering and your way around Stable Diffusion. Let me show you how. The first thing you need to do to get going is download the Blender add-on Dream Textures. I would suggest getting it from GitHub because you get the newest update there, but it's also available on Blender Market, for example. So to do so, you follow the link in the description or just what you can see on screen right now and read these installation instructions. So of course, this might be old by the time you watch the video, so I recommend just going there directly, but you can go to this latest releases section, choose your system. I'm on Windows with an NVIDIA GPU, so I download this file. Then I extract the file that I downloaded, make sure it's a zip file, and install it in Blender like any other add-on. So of course, in Blender, that's really easy. You go to Edit, Preferences, Add-ons, and Install. You click that, select the zip file, wait for it to install, then you search for it in here, Dream Textures, and activate it. Now, unlike other add-ons, there are some more things you need to install. I've of course already downloaded them, but if you haven't, just follow the instructions that you see in here to download the necessary models. This can be a pretty long download. Don't worry about it. It's about like 4 gigs or so. Now, of course, this is brand new software, so things might go wrong. Don't worry about that. I can't provide support because it changes and updates all the time, but if you experience any trouble, just visit the GitHub page, go to Discussions, and find someone else who has the same issue. Like you can see, could not install packages. People have all kinds of problems with this. It's no problem. I had an issue as well. I found it in here and figured out what they did to solve it. If you have any trouble, visit this first, and then it'll work for you. So once you've installed this add-on, it's really simple to use. Of course, here we have a standard Blender installation, the newest version, 3.4, by the way, that is important, with a default cube that we delete immediately. Then we add another cube and press N. And now over here in this N menu, you will find a Dream tab. And this will remind you of other Stable Diffusion installations because it has exactly the same features. You can select a model. I have Stable Diffusion 2 Depth, which is very important. Why? I'll explain in just a second. Down here, you can enter a prompt with some presets as well. You can go from texture, photography, concept art, anything, or just custom and enter whatever. I'm usually going to go with concept art because I like that look, kind of a video gamey look. Here you can enter your subject. For example, let's do something cube-shaped like a crate, video game style wood detailed, something like that. Then in subject type, you can select environment, character, weapon, vehicle, or custom. I'm going to leave that empty actually. And then genre, fantasy. You can also insert a negative prompt. For example, I'm going to insert photo and realistic because I want it to look kind of cartoony and all the standard stuff, right? Like ugly, bad colors, that sort of stuff works really well. Size, I'm going to leave the same. And then advanced, also the features you may know. If you don't know what all these features mean, I recommend checking out my other tutorials and learning about Stable Diffusion first, because this sets on top of all that. So you need to be both good at Blender or decent at Blender and good at Stable Diffusion to use this tool in a way that will help you. Otherwise, it can be very frustrating. They also have some speed optimizations, which is cool. I always have it on half precision because it's fine. Like it works just fine. And some other optimizations that I won't touch. And then down here, the input is super important. So there are 2 options, depth and color. Now to explain what depth means, I'm going to show you what depth map is. So the cool thing about Stable Diffusion 2.0, which is different from the original version, is that you don't only have image to image, you have depth to image. While image to image used colors and just kind of the vague look of an image to apply some AI to and change it around, depth to image understands the shape of your image, so the scene. If you look at this, for example, here's from another YouTube video, Quick Tips Creating Effective Depth Maps. You have this picture inserted, and the depth map comes out where you can tell, okay, it knows roughly what the distance of the object is to the camera, and that really helps figure out what is the actual like 3D contents of a scene. Or here, for example, this is a real depth map, right? It's not just AI generated. And using that, we can create the same contents of the image in a different look, if that makes sense. It can be kind of complicated to explain, but you'll see in just a second why this works in Blender, because What this add-on does is it uses the information from the viewport of what we're seeing right now to see what the shape is in this scene and apply a texture to it via projection mapping. This is also a technique I use in my other game assets video, so if you don't know what that is, feel free to check that out. There's a bunch of other tips in there that will be helpful with this process. But generally, it's quite simple. You tab into edit mode, and then another tip that's very important, it will generate a square image. So make your viewport as square as possible because otherwise it will stretch. And in the end menu as well, in view, increase your focal length. So you're a little further away from your object, kind of zoomed in on it like this. Make the object fill the image as good as possible. Switch to material preview mode. And then in Dream, you can click on Project Dream Texture. And what happens now is, honestly, from someone who's worked with 3D for years, perspective, truly incredible. It's going to launch for a little bit, like any Stable Diffusion app, it will load the models first, but then it's going to do this. And my mind is blown, honestly. Like, this is so fast. The time it would take to make this texture by hand is insane. And here it just made it within seconds. This is exactly what I wanted. It's a wooden crate. It's a video game look. And from this perspective, obviously it looks incredible because of the technique he uses. Then if you turn it, it doesn't anymore. But this is so easy to fix, right? I can just use the same plane that's here on this side and easily fix this. And it just saves such an incredible amount of time. Now, obviously, it's not perfect, right? We can go into UV editing and see that it's like not exactly on the edge, but that's so easily fixable by just going into UV and moving that over here. And now it's exactly on the corner. No harm done, right? But of course, a crate is really easy to do. So what can this add-on really create for you, really help you with? Well, the answer is pretty much anything if you know what to do, and I'm going to show you. So let's delete this cube again. Sorry, beautiful crate, but we're going to build something a little more advanced. It's a little up from the cube, and it's a treasure chest. I'm going to go with a pirate theme today. I feel like it. So I'm going to create another cube, tab into edit mode, and just model a real quick pirate chest the way I imagine it. Make it kind of gamey, a little cartoony. I love Sea of Thieves, so that's kind of an obvious inspiration for this. So we have kind of a basic little treasure chest here. I'm not going to make it more complicated because if we want little details, I'm going to show you later how that works exactly, but you're going to want to do them separately and then combine them at the end because, too many corners and stuff, you're going to do a lot of clone painting and stuff later, which you don't want to do. So I'm going to leave it like this, tab into edit mode, select it all, and enter my prompt. So that's a treasure chest, video game style, painted wood, gold. Subject type is, let's do item. Let's leave that empty. Fantasy is good. Make sure your input is just depth in this case because we didn't paint anything, and see what happens. And you can tell it really understood what we wanted. This is totally a treasure chest. It's really cool. A lot of detail on there that I'm not sure we love. So these rings and stuff are there, but generally we can tell the depth map worked perfectly. So let's adjust that. Let's change it to simple low poly. Project again. Very, very cool. The blue lighting is a little disturbing though, so you have to make sure that it's not like simulating light that's not really there. It's always going to do that a little bit, but that looks like there's a blue lamp over there, so I don't love that. There we go, kind of a simple treasure chest, very straightforward. It added some teeth or something, but that's what I'm happy with for now. So what we're going to do now is adjust the textures a little bit, of course. So if we switch to UV editing, you can tell it's all a little bit out of whack. I think that might be the half precision feature as well, the optimization, but it's so easy to fix. It really saves time. So I'm not going to fret about that too much. And you just select the UV vertices and just move them in a little bit, make sure they're all inside the image. And that's how easy it is to fix this, right? So now what's most obvious is, of course, everything back here is completely messed up. But that's very, very easy to fix because, of course, all of those things are also in the UV map. So if we just select those faces here on the side that just messed up completely and move them up here, adjust them slightly, they're fixed up as well. If you want to do it completely like in detail, you can also just completely copy that entire side over, flip it over, put it on this side. But for today's purposes, I'm happy to do this. There we go. We have the side fixed already. And the back is the same process, right? You just go over here, select everything that's messed up. In this case, just mirror it and adjust. You can also use proportional editing up here to make sure everything fits better. Good. And now everything else, like this stuff up here, can be fixed with texture painting. You can just go into texture paint mode here and pick the clone tool, clone stamp tool, for example, and use it just like you would in any other editing app. If you want any more adjustments, of course, you can also just do that in any painting program. Now, what's super, super, super important, this generated texture is not saved. If you don't want to lose it, you have to click up here, image, and click save and save it where you want to. Otherwise, it will be lost. So now it's secure. And there we go. We have a very simple treasure chest, but I gotta say it was very easy to generate. The bottom could be fixed too. So I'm really happy with that. It was very easy to make. And now let's make a more complicated object. Let us do a complete pirate ship, right? So this is a little more complex, but also nothing to be afraid of. You can just model a very simple, or complicated if you want, pirate ship. Just do that real quick. And there we go. There's a basic shape of a ship right there. We can shade it auto smooth if that makes us feel better. It's nice. We're going to do the masts and the sails later because, as I said, doing individual details like that is much easier separately. And now make sure before we generate the textures that you have everything else hidden away because it's going to end up in the depth map otherwise. You can just hide that and remove the rendering up there in the outliner, and then we'll be all set. So now what I want to show you is some texture painting features and the depth and color feature. So we can also tell it vaguely what color we want things. We go into the shading tab, create a new material for it, name it appropriately, and create a new image texture for it. One way to do that is, of course, Shift A, look for image texture and put it in there. But a way I love doing it is using the Node Wrangler. It's a pre-installed Blender add-on that you can just find in here. So you go to add-ons, look for Node Wrangler, and just click that checkbox. It's already installed. You don't need to download anything. Activate it, and then you select this default principled BSDF node and press Control-T. And then suddenly, you will have an image texture, a mapping node, and a texture coordinate node. It's very cool. Now you select your image texture node, press New, and create a texture called, I'm going to call it Ship Sketch. It's very simple. And we can make it 512 by 512. And now one final important step, we need a good UV map. I'm going to tab into edit mode, select everything UV, Smart UV Project, and make sure there's an island margin because we're about to paint over it. I like doing 0.04, that's fine. And now we switch to texture paint. And now you can see these little islands here that are roughly ship-shaped that we just generated. And we can now slowly paint what we want on here. So I'm going to fill it with kind of this ship brown color and paint in some basic like boards and stuff to just help it understand that we want wood and I want some cannons up here. So I'm going to draw in some cannons and I would like some windows back here. So we're not entirely sure what's going to be where, but this should be just fine. And now it's time to actually texture these things. So what's very important is if we want to go back ever to this original sketch, we have to make a backup of our UV map because it will be changed with the projection. So I'm just going to press plus, and there's our backup already. And now I am going to go to a side view of this ship. And now we go into N, Dream, and enter Sail Ship. Wooden planks, sail ship. Let's add cannons, windows, and see what happens when we change input to depth and color and project dream texture. And here you go. It made us a pretty cool ship texture already. Works on both sides because we did the side view. The above is, of course, to be ignored. But it kind of messed up the cannons. I don't know if I love that. Do not undo because it might delete stuff. Unfortunately, this add-on will like remove prompts and forget about things, so do not press undo. Delete the current UV map, go back to UV map 01, and reassign your original texture. That's the only way to get back. Make a backup again and adjust your prompt. Okay, good. It's actually added some portholes and stuff, so that's pretty neat, but not quite there yet. So just experiment with your settings until you get what you like, but this is the general method, which is really cool. And once you have a texture you kind of like, you can move on to the other parts of it. Now, the cool thing is the add-on will only project onto the vertices that you have selected. So what you can do is, for example, for this deck here, you can actually just select the deck and any parts you might like, Shift H to hide the rest, and then fill the entire viewport with it. Make sure you see as much of it as possible. We could also go completely frontal and then rotate the object if we feel like it. And then enter ship deck. You can keep the depth and color, but turn up the noise strength because there's a lot of projection errors here we don't want. And then all of a sudden, you get a really, really nice little ship deck on there. You can unhide everything with Alt-H again. And there we go. We suddenly have a really cool little ship. And the same goes for the back of the ship. So we just select it, only those little pieces that aren't textured correctly, and you'll end up with a good result. So we're really starting to develop kind of a cool little texture here. So before we continue, you might be wondering why the ship looks a little different now. It's because I didn't follow my own advice and actually forgot to save most of the textures, so I had to completely redo them. But anyway, in the next step, what you do is just clean up those materials a little, delete everything that wasn't, that you didn't use, all those diffuse textures, because it does create a new material every time, and then make sure that all of your materials have similar settings here. Just adjust it to how you want, but I'm just going to put roughness to 1 and specular down to 0. So just make sure that's the case with all of them. And now we're ready to make the next piece of it. So I want to actually make some masts, which is very straightforward, right? They're just cylinders. So I'm just going to be quick about it and make those. Very simple. I mean, we could also just texture one individual, but let's try to do all of it. So masts of a ship. Painted low poly dark wood, that's all fine, and just see what happens. Maybe we'll be lucky. And we were in fact lucky, we just have to adjust the UVs a little bit, but generally those are all masts just the way I wanted them. That's kind of turned into a tree, but no problem. We can just adjust our UVs. We're not here for super precision. So that was pretty straightforward, and now we're going to make something very exciting, namely the sails. So here I want to do something a little more interesting, right? So we can make a normal plane like this, just subdivide it a couple times. Something like this, turn on proportional editing. Just bring it forward like that. That's a good general sail shape. And now what I'm going to do is texture just one first, right? So it's it doesn't overlap each other, because if we just project it onto 3 sails, it would have the image of the sail in front of it projected onto it. So I'm going to make them individually, and then just array them and turn one sail into 3. Shade smooth. Make sure I didn't have any scale changes here. And now, edit mode. Keep the perspective like this, and I want to not turn off the ship, right? So this is part of the depth information, and even though it's not part of what I'm texturing, I want to keep the ship in the image because it sort of helps as a hint as to what this is. So I can actually make this sail a little bit bigger, then tab in there, go sail of a ship, video game style, painted low poly, top view, dark wood. But what I'm curious about now is if I can actually draw something on the sail, like a skull, something kitschy like that, and have that transfer. So I'm going to make a new material called sail here, and I'm going to Control T with my node wrangler, right? To have an image texture there, make a new image texture, call it sail sketch. go into texture paint, and very simply just pick a color, fill that in, and then paint, just roughly paint a skull and crossbones. So we're going to describe the skull and crossbones and add some more info, right? Dark wood doesn't make sense anymore, so that's cloth, dirty, stitches, damage, tears, something like that, you know? Change the input to depth and color. So that's interesting. That's an interesting painting on there, but I like the folds it put into the cloth. So that's pretty cool. Interesting. It looks like a little dancing man. That's fun. Okay, I actually like that creativity. That's fun. Yeah, let's keep that. So I'm going to adjust the UV map here. There we have a fun little sail. That could actually be a lot bigger there. Good. So now we make the other ones. I don't want the other ones to also have a skull on them, so I'm going to Shift Duplicate, Shift D, and bring the front one here. Make it a little smaller there. I'm going to reapply this sail texture that we had on it, except I'm going to change the texture now. So I'm going to go back to texture paint, select this sail color that we had picked out, and just reapply it. And now just project a normal sail texture on there. So edit and remove the skull and bones thing. Everything else stays the same, and just project. And there we go. We have a pretty cool little sail texture there now. We can do the same thing with the back sail. Just duplicate. And if we want, we can hide that middle sail because it's kind of in the way. And just do the same exact thing again. Reassign that and just do it again. Good, there we go. That's pretty close to the original. So now we have a bunch of different objects. You just turn that into one object by selecting them all the items we have, Control-J, join, and there we have one object. You can add more details if you want, you know, ropes and stuff and stairs or whatever, but I'm actually really happy with this model as it is right now. Now you can clean up these materials a little bit. If there's a material you don't know, you can also select it here and press select, and it'll select all the vertices, all the faces that have it. So in this case, none of them have it. You can safely delete it. And what we're going to do in the final step is a process called baking. What does baking do? In this case, I'm using it to combine all these different materials and textures onto one final texture in one material. So it's easier to use as a game asset, for example, or generally just to, you know, use this object easily without having to carry around all of this overhead here. Now, the way to do this is quite simple in Blender. You just have to create a new material that you can call baked material, for example, and you need a new UV map. So again, select this, go into UV maps, create a new UV map, select it all, UV, Smart UV Project, island margin can be smaller now, so 0.01 is fine, and press OK. And now it's going to make this. And you can name the UV map baked. And now one final thing, go into the shading tab in the baked material and create one more image texture. We're going to call it baked diffuse because technically we are baking a diffuse texture. You don't have to know further about that, just the basic color basically of it. And make sure this is bigger than 512 because you're baking 512 textures onto a bigger texture, right? You don't want it to be resized when you're baking. So 2048 is good, for example. And now the most time-intensive part of this process is you have to copy this baked diffuse texture node into every single one of these materials. So just go ahead and do that. Make sure it's always selected in every single material. Good, go back into your baked material, and now you have to change the render engine to cycles. So make sure that's on, because otherwise you can't bake, and then go down here to the Bake tab. Now the bake type is diffuse, so make sure you switch it to diffuse, and under influence, make sure only color is checked under contributions, because otherwise you're going to have light baked onto there as well, which you do not want right now. And now, one final check, make sure your baked UV map is actually selected, so you bake it onto the new UV map. And then you can press bake. And there we have it. So make sure you save that image, otherwise it will be deleted again. So save that. And now, of course, you're not seeing it yet. So what you can do now is you change your UV map to the baked one. Everything's going to go off. But then you will select everything and assign your baked material. And there we go. It looks the same, but in the background, everything is different because now you can delete all of those materials and have just one left, namely your baked material, which is very, very helpful for any use outside of Blender, but also inside, right? It's practical. You have everything in one place. The resolution is nice and big. You can, of course, upscale it or whatever. Or, like I did in my other video, go in and edit individual parts of this with other methods, other installations of Stable Diffusion. I won't go into that, but if you want to see that, just check out my other video and learn a whole bunch how you can edit this individually. So here's where I got with a little more experimentation. A real strength of this add-on is that you can iterate really quick. If you have one model of something, you can easily make different variations of it. And this, for example, would be perfect for a little mobile game, at least for prototyping. You have 4 different ships, you have evil versions, kind of the pretty yacht-style ships. And I made this in a couple minutes, right? So with the techniques in this video, you can easily at least prototype video game assets. You can make background assets for videos. You can very easily, make a city, for example, that looks totally original. You don't have to use models online. You could also import objects that exist and retexture them entirely, bring them into new contexts. So it's a very powerful technique. I'm sure there will be more development coming soon. So there's updates regularly. This video might already be old when you're watching it. So make sure you regularly check the GitHub, check the add-on, and see what new features they have in store. If this was helpful to you in any way, please subscribe to this channel, leave a like, and leave a comment telling me so. If you have any questions, do the same, and I'll respond to you as fast as I can. With that, thank you so much for watching. I'm Albert Bosezan, and I hope you have fun with Stable Diffusion and Blender.